Welcome to The Right Frame of Mind, a podcast that explores the mental hurdles of a writing career. I'm your host, Adrienne Giordano. In each episode, I talk with an author about a challenge they faced and the mindset shift that got them through. Let's dive into the writer's mind. Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm here with my guest, Kristan Higgins, the author of more than 20 novels, all of which were New York Times and USA Today bestsellers. Her books have been translated into 24 languages and have sold millions of copies worldwide. Her accolades include star reviews from Entertainment Weekly, People, the New York Journal of Books, Publishers Weekly, Library Journal, and Booklist. Welcome to the show, Kristan.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here.
One of the things I really want to talk about is kind of your writing journey. I can remember back in the day, probably 2006-ish, if I am correct. I was at the RWA conference with, 3,000 of my closest friends.
Right.
And this was as I call them, my pre-published days. And I walked into the ballroom for lunch, and sitting on every chair in that ballroom was one of your books. And you were at that point a new to me author. Mm-hmm. So I remember thinking, oh my gosh, how cool would that be one day to have my book on every chair in this room?
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit? What that felt like, the journey to get there.
Sure. I was also dazzled because that wasn't my choice. That was my publisher's choice. And they're like, oh, by the way, we're, giving away books at the luncheon. I was like, oh God, that's amazing. And it was just a great call by my then publisher, HQN Books, a division of Harlequin. And that's the kind of thing that they would do to build momentum around a new author. And, because I think writers read. And so if you get writers to read and they like you, then, you've got a lifelong reader for yourself. Yeah. But I had a pretty easy time of getting published. I decided to write a book. I didn't always want to be a writer or dream about it. I just kind of thought, I bet maybe I could write a book. I worked in advertising. I was a copywriter. I had won some awards for that. So I knew how to write for a living. But at the time, I had done that. I had my children. I was a stay-at-home mom. And I was looking at going back to work when my son went to school full-time, my younger child. And I thought, I really want to not go back to work and stay home. And, if the kids are sick, I'll be the one to take care of them or meet the school bus and all that stuff. So I thought, well, I can bartend, I can, take care of children. I can bake a really good cake. And that's about it for life skills, I make beds really beautifully, so that I didn't have a lot of transferable skills to the workforce, especially when nobody worked from home, So I thought, well, I've read a lot of books. Maybe I can write one. And I thought I'll write a romantic comedy because I think everybody likes those. Yeah. Initially, I wanted to write a historical romance, kind of a dark, serious historical romance set in Ireland about a Protestant and an Irish, two protagonists, and how Catholic and Protestant Irish, and make it really angsty and with meaty political issues. And then I was like, my God, I hate just thinking about this book.
So. I was going to say, because remembering those books that, your earlier books, is they're so funny.
Potato famine romance was not, really going to gain any momentum. I call it po-fam romance.
Po-fam romance. It's a new genre. You've just invented a genre.
Nobody knows what'll be the next thing. So I wrote a romantic comedy, and I tried to get an agent. I was rejected by all the agents except, for the ones who never got back to me. And And then I like reworked
They chose to resist.
Yes, right. And I tried again, because one of the good things about coming from a business background is, you think like you don't take rejection as personally. You think, like, okay, I need to take a different approach, not like you are rejecting my soul,
Yes.
So I took a different approach. I just wrote a better cover letter, better blurb, and that first book got picked up by the first agent who read it, and she was my agent for, I think, 17 years, and really, believed in me. She was a wonderful agent, and then she got me a contract with Harlequin. It was funny. It was a 2-book deal. And I was like, oh, do I have to write another book? Oh, okay. So I had no other
20
ideas.
books later.
Right. And I thought, okay, well, I can hopefully write another book. And yeah, here we are. I think I'm on my 26th book now.
Wow.
And I never thought this would be my career. I thought like this would be until I found something more, serious or lucrative or something like that. Because my husband's a firefighter, we were very middle-class people. And then the book things just kept, taking off and working. And I'm a big believer in right book, right time. I don't think of myself as like so very, very talented and all that. I think that book resonated. It just filled a hole in the marketplace, being small town romance, which was not really a thing back in the early 2000s. Yeah. And so I was lucky to have that book, to have that publisher who really stuck with me and built my career. I think my first book was a sleeper hit. My second book won the Rita Award at Romance Writers of America. So there was great word of mouth among authors there. And then my third book didn't do as well. And they're like, that's okay. We believe in your career, not just this book.
Wow.
And then my fourth book was my first bestseller. And, in terms of like hitting the lists and that kind of thing. And it was dazzling. It was amazing, and I think it really served me well to not know the publishing industry, to just be there to write the books, because the publishing industry, as you and I have discussed before, is really tough and very mercurial. So when you go in it with an open heart and, you're really authentic and sincere and you're like, I wrote a book and, it got published, it's wonderful. Those early days are wonderful. And I'm so happy that I had Harlequin behind me, because they definitely believed in me. And then, from there, I started to lean into women's fiction. I think all of my books have a women's fiction element, which means it's more focused on the woman's journey of like getting to the point where you can have this wonderful relationship, rather than having the relationship, right? So they said, why don't you lean into that, and we'll repackage you in trade and hardcover, and so that's where my career kind of led.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Just to have that early support must have been such a blessing.
Oh yeah.
So we kind of, when we were going back and forth about you being on the show, you had mentioned that Look on the Bright Side was a harder book to write versus Pack Up the Moon was easier for you to write. So I would love to hear a little bit about what was the difference between those books? What makes one easier than the other?
Well, I never know which book I'm going to write next. I've only written one series, which was the Blue Heron series, and even that was a surprise to me. I had planned to write like 3 books, and I ended up writing 5, and I had no plan or outline for the next few books. It's very organic with me. And so writing Pack Up the Moon, which is the story of a married couple where she is diagnosed with a terminal illness, 11 months into their marriage. And she dies in chapter 1. She wants to take care of her husband, who is kind of a loner. He's a bit on the spectrum. He works by himself. He has trouble connecting with people. And so she decides, knowing that, she will not have a long life, that she'll give him a list of things that he should do for every month of the first year of his widowhood. And her story is told from days before she dies, backwards in time to the day that she meets Joshua. And his story is told from the day she dies forward through the next year. And I think that one of the things that made that book so easy to write was it had a very clearly defined structure. The book would last a year. It would take place over a year for Joshua, and then maybe a year before Lauren's death. And so each chapter, or pretty much each chapter, is defined by what Josh has to do according to the letter of this month. And that just made it very tidy to write. And I have a way of writing that I don't think is terribly common, where I keep each chapter separate from all the other chapters. They all get put in the same folder, but they're not the same document. And so I can work on a Lauren point of view chapter and then a Joshua point of view. And I don't have to worry about how it's all going to fit together until almost the very end of the book. So it's, if you know anything about quilting, you make the quilt square, and then you put it aside and you make the other quilt square. And then at the end you say, like, I think this one would look better over here in this corner, and I'll move these around. And so that's kind of what I do.
Do you do that in, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Do you do that in Word or Scrivener?
I start in Scrivener, and then I go to Word, and then I'll go back to Scrivener to say, okay, chapter 1 is going to be this, chapter 2, and then I can move it around according to those, 43 documents that I have in my folder called separate chapters. So I also think that book was easy for me to write because it explores something that's a big part of my life, and not necessarily in a bad way, but that is grief. I think that grief is an expression of love. And like most people, I have had some profound losses, and I'm married to a firefighter. So being widowed has been on my mind since day one. And my dad died young, and my mom, has been widowed for decades. And I wanted to explore grieving and moving through grief. You never get over it. You just carry it better, and I know that from personal experience, and I wanted to incorporate it into this beautiful love story because Josh and Lauren have a beautiful relationship, and they really put each other first. So to me, this is a book about how to be loved and then how to grieve and come out eventually on the other side okay. And that old saying, better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. So that book was pretty easy for me to write. I enjoyed writing it. It was heartbreaking for me to write it. I mean, the last day when I finally finished the book, I posted a picture of the space where I work, and it was just surrounded in wadded up tissues.
Oh my goodness.
Like, if my books make you cry, just know that they make me cry too.
Oh, I love that.
So that book was, it was completely unscripted, unplanned. I finished the book before that and thought, like, what do I write? What do I want to write about next? It was also inspired by a beautiful visual that I can see like it was yesterday. It was winter. I was on Cape Cod, and it was bitter, bitter cold. And my dog and I were at the beach freezing to death. And I was like, we need to get home, Luther, before we're dead. And I see this guy walking like in a windbreaker, as Yankees are prone to doing. We don't really believe in winter coats. He's walking along the water. It's like 12 degrees out. The wind is cold, and he's just staring out to sea. And I had this thought, he looks like the loneliest man in the world, and I want to fix him.
Yes.
And so I kept that image very close to my heart as I wrote it, of this man who is utterly lost without his wife, and how I put, you always say, like, be as mean as you can to your characters,
Yes.
because it makes for good reading. And so I made him a loner. I made him work alone. I made him on the spectrum where reading people's signs was difficult for him. And Lauren had sort of been his interpreter. And, they had this perfect love, and now he's alone. And how is he going to get through this? He's so ill-suited to the task, which is why it makes a great story, because it is a difficult journey for him. So
that's such a great visual too, of him just staring out at the sea.
Yeah. And I actually put that in the book, that, on the first Christmas without her, he drives to the Cape and goes to the edge of the water and stares out at the icy cold ocean and just thinks, I'm lost. And so that book is perhaps my best-selling book. It has been reprinted, I don't know, 12 times by now. It's sold hundreds of thousands of copies. It was a TikTok darling, and that helped it a lot. So TikTok reviewers, thank you. Wow, you really helped that book, and it's been optioned for a film.
Oh my gosh, congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah, it's so cool to be able to say that. Now, whether the film will be made is always another question, but yeah, I view that as like my favorite child in some ways, not because of its success as much as the story that it told, and the ease and the joy and the depth of emotion that I had when I was writing it.
So when you think about the other book, then, and I think when we're writers, we all have books sometimes that are just easier to write than others. When you're dealing with one that doesn't feel so easy, what helps you to push past those challenges?
Yeah, so Look on the Bright Side, which was my last release that came out last summer, that was a very difficult book to write, because I was once again writing a series, and that had been my publisher's idea. They said, you obviously know Cape Cod very well. My family has had a place on the Cape for since I was little, and we spend our a lot of time up there, our happiest family times, and so they said, we love the town, the Cape, there's such a sense of setting here. Why don't you stay there and write a series? And I said, okay. And to me, it felt a little bit like a step backward. And I think in a way that it was. But I believe in collaboration with your editor and your publisher and your team and everything. And so I said, okay, I'll give it a shot. And this book was harder because it didn't have that sort of clear structure. And because markets change very quickly. So, I was writing small town romance before it was a genre, and then it became really big. And then I started writing women's fiction, because women's fiction, which we're now calling book club fiction, that became bigger. And I was doing sort of like the romantic storyline through the story of maybe two female protagonists and so on. And then there was some messaging of lean back into romance. And, the tropey stuff was selling really well. And I love romance tropes, so I thought, okay, I'll give it a try. So this is a fake relationship trope. And I think what was hard for me was to bring my more mature, emotional writing style to a fake relationship trope, to something that is usually light and bouncy and fun, and to put a spin on it, because I don't like to do the expected. So in this story, the hero is not the fake boyfriend. And in fact, he's a really unlikable character, which was a lot of fun to write too. And I think that just thinking like I'm trying to write a book that will appeal to readers right now was the wrong way to do it.
Mm.
And I had never before done it. I had written the book
Yes.
that I thought I should write, that the one that appealed to me. And so I think it kind of constipated me in a
Yeah.
way, you know, it just, it,
Yeah.
it, it was tough. And I kept trying to think, like, how can I make this book more me and
Mm-hmm.
less adorable, right? And nothing against adorable. I've written many adorable books. But at this time in my career, it was a little bit hard to fall back into that. And I'm really
Yeah.
proud of the book. Like, I love this book, but it was one of those books that, you know, you're in labor for 48 hours and then they give
Yes.
you a C-section at the end, right? You know,
Yeah.
so it was like every kind of difficulty. And also, while I was writing that book, I lost one of my best friends and
Mm.
my aunt, who was only a few years older than I was and more like a sister. Within a week, they died the same week. So
Oh my
I
gosh,
was,
I'm
you
so
know,
sorry.
yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. I mean, it was awful, and yet you have a job to do, right? You have a deadline.
Right.
They have your release date. You know, marketing is ramping up. The cover needs to be set. All the things that happen in the industry. Um, so I muscled through writing that book, and I worked very hard on revising it once it was. My first drafts are always awful, but this one was especially awful, and worked really hard to shape it into something that I could be proud of and feel like this is my book. This is, you know, that's my
Yeah.
name on the cover, and I'm proud of what's inside it.
Yeah. And what do you think helped you to do that? To just remind yourself, this is a book I can be proud of. Like, what's the thing when you're feeling that friction? In the coaching world,
Mm-hmm.
there's like that fuel versus friction. The fuel helps
Right.
you move forward, and the friction is what you're rubbing up against.
Mm-hmm.
What helped you just to lean into, I've done this before, I can do this.
Well, that is something that really helped. I have struggled with other books. You know, this was my 25th book, and I said, you know, I'm now, much to my surprise, a professional novelist, right? So I
Yeah.
reminded myself of that. Like, um, I've done this. What do they say? 10,000 hours makes you an expert.
Yeah.
I've done, you know, many tens of thousands of hours on writing, and I thought, like, I know what I'm doing. You know, if I'm not feeling it right now, if it's harder and slower, I still know what I'm doing. And I also had to kind of shut out the rest of the world, including my editor, my agent. You know, I just had to
Mm.
hunker down and be alone and get back in touch with the things that I love about my books and the things that readers have told me they love about my books. And, you know, it was like wrestling a python versus Pack Up the Moon, which was like holding a puppy,
Yeah, yeah.
you know? But in the end, you know, both of those books are, you know, like signature Kristan Higgins books where they're
Hmm.
funny, they're sad, they've got a tangled family, and you know, my tagline is laugh, cry, laugh again, and it delivered. Um, and I really, in the end, like when I read it, I don't know about you, Adrienne, but I don't reread my books. I read them once when the box of author copies is delivered. So it's been at that point maybe 8 months since I last looked at the book, and then I read it, and I was so happy reading Look on the Bright Side because I thought, like, it's
Oh,
wonderful. You did it, Higgins. You know, you pulled it off. It
yeah.
was it was a lot. It was a lot harder to pull off, and I think that as writers, we do have to trust ourselves,
Yeah.
especially when market forces, industry is changing, and you know they want you to kind of pivot quickly, and you know they're always chasing the latest trend or hit, you know, just like in any entertainment industry. And I think that you really have to listen to yourself and shut out the rest of the world in order to stick with it. And I'm very fortunate that this was my 25th book. because if it had been my fifth book, I don't know that I could have pulled it off. I don't think I would have had the confidence to say, Kristan, you know what you're doing. You've written books before. This will be a good book in the end.
And I love, the idea of trusting yourself, being able to just look at it and trust yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing.
And it can
amazing.
be, we've talked about, writing is wonderful and publishing is hard. The publishing industry can be really tough, and you can get a lot of mixed messages. And as you so nicely said in the beginning, all of my books have been bestsellers, which that they weren't
amazing.
Always like,
yeah.
My first publisher reissued some books, and like 5 years after it came out, it hit the Times list or something, and which for me, I'm like, oh, there's been a mistake, and they're like, no, Kristan,
no, it's not a mistake.
But you don't know the result when you start writing. And I think that one of the worst things you can do as an author is plan to be a huge success, because that's not in your hands, right? And if you say, like, I'm going to write a book, I'm going to make $1 million, I'm going to go on book tour and Jimmy Kimmel and, whatever. Don't plan on that. That's not going to happen. You can't write for a monetary reason or even for bragging rights to say I'm published, right? You can be published no matter what these days. And there's so much freedom and beauty in that too. But if you're going to write a book to be, a best-selling author, that's probably not a great goal. I think the goal should be write a fantastic book and then do it again and then do it again.
Yeah. And especially because the market is so saturated now, and there's so many more books, and in a lot of ways it makes it almost harder to hit a list because we are so fragmented now.
Right. And I think the lists mean less and less, because they measure a week's sales, the first week's sales, what makes you a bestseller, pre-orders and that kind of thing. And, I'm going to give an example of one of my favorite authors and someone I admire and love and enjoy. And I was an early fan, Kennedy Ryan, who is right now probably one of the most successful authors in America in terms of the enthusiasm for her books, the adaptations, the film rights, the television rights, just the love that's out there. She started out being rejected and self-publishing because that was the option open to her. And now, all those books have had new life and new viewers, and it's all because readers love her. And rightly so. She's an incredible talent and a beautiful person. She deserves every good thing. Yeah. It's just thrilling to see that kind of a journey. But you can't plan on that. And all you can control is the book in front of you.
Yep.
And it's very hard to remember when your marketing plan basically consists of you pushing your book, doing newsletters, being adorable on social media, getting other authors to, endorse your book, blurb your book, mention your book. And I think more and more selling the book is becoming up to the authors. And that's something that I disagree with. That's not my job. My job is to write the books.
When I speak with readers, I was at an event last week I was telling you about, and I don't know that readers, and there's really no way for them to know how much of our day requires the marketing side versus the writing side. It's a huge part of it. But, you just never know. You never know when, somebody's going to retweet something or whatever, that can put the book on a totally different path.
Right. Good, bad, or otherwise,
Or otherwise, yep.
So, and what something, my assistant actually told me, Mel Jolly, said, Kristan, no one cares how hard the book was for you to write. They just are going to read the finished product and enjoy it. So if you bled all over it and it took you 2 months longer than it usually takes you, and your aunt and friend died when you were writing it, it's not that people don't care, but they don't know. They're just, hey, Kristan has a new book out, or I've never heard of this author, let me pick this up. So that's all very internalized, and that's not something that you necessarily want to share with readers. I'm exhausted. I was crying in my hotel room a few hours ago. But because they've come out to see you and you give them your best self. And that's something that's never been hard for me. I'm always thinking like, you guys could be home watching Netflix. And you chose to come out and see us instead,
That's such a great way to think about it too. Yeah, because without our readers, right, we can't do. I sent out a newsletter today. I said the same thing. Without readers,
read that newsletter.
We don't get. Oh well, thank you. We don't get to do what we love to do. So it really is all about just giving them a satisfying ending to the book, letting them enjoy the ride.
Yeah, letting them feel the emotions that you've given them, and it's always so rewarding, as to have somebody write to you and say, I couldn't cry after my husband died, and then I read your book, or I, you make me believe that I'll find somebody too, because our books are so hopeful, and they're so positive. No matter what happens in a book, the character will always end up better than they started, no matter what. And that's our promise, right? That's our promise to our readers in our genre. So I think that, it's important to remember that as hard as writing gets, and I think it has gotten harder, definitely for me, I used to just write books. I remember being told, I've been published such a long time now, you need to have a website. That was it.
That was it, right? You didn't need all the social media, all the Substacks, and all of that.
Yeah, there was no Facebook. I think I joined Facebook in 2010. I was like, oh, if I have to,
Right.
And because I personally, wouldn't use it to like say, hey, my kid got an A on their paper or something. The way, but when my cousins do that, I'm always thrilled. But I would not have had a social media presence if not for being an author. And it was something that I had to learn to do and learn to do well. But the days when we could just write books and sit back and let the team do the rest are over.
They're over.
And readers know that you're adorable on social media, or that you responded to their email telling you what they thought of your book, or that you wrote a funny newsletter or blog or Substack, and they also know, like, if you tweet something political that they don't like, or, you mention something in a book and it rubs them the wrong way, they'll let you know too. So it's definitely a double-edged sword. One of my books, the heroine's dad, who was a very cold, unlikable person, had a pet snake, and like a ball python. And this woman wrote to me and she's like, I can't believe you put a snake in that book. I'm terrified of snakes. I will never read you again.
Oh my goodness.
I was like, oh, I'm sorry I didn't call you and clear this first,
But the snake with you.
But really, like, she was passionately upset with me. And, I didn't make fun of her or anything, I just said, I'm sorry you reacted that way. Thank you for trying. And,
what do I do with this?
What else do you say?
Right. Yes.
So being you are a public person as a writer, whether you want to be or not.
Yeah.
And
I think so much, like you said, it's about choosing how you want to put yourself out there. How much of your personal life or how much not of your personal life. It's all, it's all to be thought about.
Yeah.
All right.
sure.
So, what is, as we kind of wrap up here, is there one thing when you look back over the years, thinking about pre-published Kristan, is there one piece of advice or habit that you would say, try this or not?
There's two. One
Okay.
was given to me,
Yay.
and one I thought of myself. When I was a baby author, I had one book out. It wasn't even out yet. I went to my first conference before my first book came out. And one of my agent's other authors was there, and she was very successful, NYT bestseller and stuff. And I said, Cindy, do you have any advice for a new author? And she's like, yeah, I do, as a matter of fact. She said, keep your head down, stay off the loops, I think they were called then.
Yep. Yep.
And do your thing. And it remains the best advice I've ever gotten about writing. You know, don't listen to the market, because your book will come out in a year, year and a half, 2 years after that market, right? You know, if you're writing an Emily Henry book right now, well, by the time your book comes out, like everybody might be reading vampires or something, you know?
Right.
So you write your book, don't listen, and just, you know, keep focused. And then the second bit of advice is a little bit more day-to-day practical, and that's the thing that works for me. I leave my document open so that when I sit down at the computer in the morning, in addition to reading the news and checking social media and you know, looking at cute dogs on Pinterest, I see my document, and so it brings me right back into where I left off.
Yes.
And it keeps it in my mind, even if I don't write that day. And I don't write every day. You know, I'm a mom, I'm a grandmother, I'm a volunteer, I'm a gardener, I make quilts and bake. I'm such an old woman at heart. And so I don't write every day, but I have my book in my mind every day. And maybe it's when I'm like doing grocery shopping that I think, you know, that sentence this morning just gave me a new idea, and I think I'm going to go this way with that. And then I dictate it into my phone so I don't forget.
Yep,
Right.
Absolutely.
So yeah, just looking at it, it just keeps it present.
And it just proves the point. We all have a process, right? And knowing our process sometimes is so important, just to know what works for us and what doesn't work for us.
And another bit of advice I got from Susan Elizabeth Phillips, who's one of my idols and my friend as well. She said, I stopped fighting my process years ago. I hate my process, but it is the process that gets the books.
It is what it is, yeah.
Right? And I was like, that makes so much sense, you know, rather than try another way. It's like, this is the one that's gotten all the books out. So just, you know, suck it up, buttercup.
Yep. Love it. All right. Well, thank you so much for hanging out with me, chatting a little bit. I will post all of your links and that in the show notes, but is there somewhere you want readers to connect, or is there somewhere you're more often?
For readers, I'm have a Facebook page just for readers called Kristan Higgins Super Readers, and then, you know, you can just find me wherever through my website, on my different social media sites. But yeah, thank you so much. This has been really fun, Adrienne, and congratulations on your book release today.
Well done. That's yep. You know, as I said this morning, it never gets old.
Yeah, it never does. It never does.
It never does. Well, thank you again. And thank you all for listening to The Right Frame of Mind. The Right Frame of Mind is a member of the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. I'll be back soon with another great interview and more tips for managing the mental challenges of a creative career. Have a great day, everybody.